Once your identity is something that you cannot change, like if your identity is that you're Latino or that you're Black, something in some sense that's fixed, it actually becomes more fragile.
We live in this era where it's like, if you don't accept me for exactly who I am and what I am and how I am, then you haven't accepted me for my authentic self. And sometimes I wonder if our authentic self is really just not our best self.
You cannot get rid of a negative thing if you don't add a positive thing. You really do have to replace negative habits with positive habits. Everything in life that is good requires hard work. Everything in life that is destructive requires no work.
You're listening to the Mindshift podcast. My name is Erwin McManus, and I'm here with my dad, Erwin McManus. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm overlooking New York City. Can't ask for a better day than that.
You can't ask for a better view than this. Honestly, we're sitting at the Soho Grand Hotel in Soho. Shout out to Grand Life. They always take care of us when we're here. We love you guys. We're really appreciative of you. We're here in town doing Mosaic's pop-up in New York City.
Yeah, we did a breakfast tour.
We did a breakfast tour. We went and got some breakfast at Jack's wife's Frida, and then, which is so white girl of us.
And before that, I actually went to Happier Grocery.
You did?
Got coffee this morning.
And then we went to Eat Cops Donuts on Morton in West Village. If you haven't, shout out to Alexander White. He's a marketing genius.
But in between, you went to La Cabra.
Went to La Cabra. I took you on a long detour to get me coffee.
So I think we went to 4 different spots for breakfast today.
We went to you went to Happier Grocery, which is, those guys. Shout out those guys. And then we went to La Cabra. Anyways, if you're listening to the Mindshift podcast right now, which it seems like you probably are if you're hearing this message, one, we want to invite you to join our Mindshift community. It's $25 a month. We go deep dive. We do some private episodes, some unreleased episodes, some episodes that are a little bit too hot to handle, and we bring it back there. But we also do a once a month community call. And we have all of the hundreds of members who are a part of the Mindshift community jump on a Zoom call with us, and we shoot a live episode completely driven by the community, where the community asks Q&As or asks us questions, and we dive in and break into them. And it's actually pretty cool.
It is so much fun. It's fun to meet through Zoom so many of the people who are part of our Mindshift community, to put faces behind the audience.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. And then to get those questions, it really gives us a more guided way of really understanding what topics and what conversations I think are really relevant and most helpful to our people.
Absolutely. So if you're a part of this podcast, or you've been listening, one episode, or you've been listening for years, we really appreciate your support. And the reason why we did this, the heart behind the community really is, for years, people have been reaching out going, how can we give to Mindshift? How can we subscribe? How can we support financially the episodes and the podcasts and kind of what you guys are doing? So this is our way of inviting you into supporting the podcast. If you've ever been interested in supporting, you can join the Mindshift community. Today, you just go to mindshiftpod.com or the link in the bio of this episode. And if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or YouTube, hit subscribe, rate and review this podcast. Let us know what you think, or even better, give us a subject that you'd like us to talk about.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that you've really valued is not having advertisers. And so far, in all the years we've been doing this, it's been commercial free. And so one of the ways that you get to help get this conversation out to the world is by joining our community, being a part of it, and helping us connect more people to these important conversations we're having.
It's really incredible. Okay, so let's jump into this subject. We want to go into mind shifts that we're making right now. And one of the things that we were talking about on our walk this morning was, it seems like the world's changing, the world's shifting. We were walking through Washington Square Park, and there was a protest. And however you feel politically, it was interesting. We just heard, a woman over the loudspeaker. What did they call, like the bullhorns?
Yeah, bullhorn. She was hot.
She was hot, and she was firing, and she was talking about, I think it was an anti-Trump protest, anti-Eric Adams protest. And one of our guys just said, isn't it amazing that we live in a country where we're allowed to protest?
When Austin asked me, what do you think it is? My immediate response was either a pro-Hamas protest or a anti-Trump protest, and it was very much an anti-Trump, anti-Adams.
They were like, let's get rid of Eric Adams. It was
they picked a Democrat and a
man.
Republican together.
Yeah,
and,
the world is uniting.
But I did think it's interesting that we do live in this free country where people can state their positions. We can protest. We can have conflicting views. that is a part of what makes this country so unique and so special, is that we have the community of ideas that come together, and we can actually debate and argue and disagree and agree and change our minds, which I think is one of the great things about Mindshift, is that one of our early mottos was we reserve the right to change our minds. And I think intelligent thinking people are always open to changing their minds. They're always open to getting more information, new data, new insights, new perspectives, and seeing the world in a new and different way. And I think that's very, very important. And I just love the conversations we've had over the years. And I always do think it's interesting, though, that there are people who listen who love the podcast as long as we agree with them.
Okay.
And then the moment there's one topic out of 1,000 where we disagree, and they're like, we're out, or I can no longer listen to you, or I can no longer follow you. And I find that to be an interesting reflection of our cultural problem. Is I listen to people who I almost never agree with.
Hey, who?
And well, I mean, if you listen to the conversations between, that Joe Rogan has, or Chris Williamson, or who's
Lex Friedman?
No, I love Lex Friedman and Huberman, but who's the guy who wrote the book on power, and his name is just eluding me right now. Robert, do you remember? Greene.
Robert Greene. Yeah.
I've
never seen his pod.
And I listened to a lot of clips from him and stuff like that. And I don't agree with a lot of things he says, but I think he's fascinating. I think he's insightful and sometimes almost terrifying. But I just love all those different perspectives. I appreciate people who don't agree with them. And I learned so much from people whose positions are different than mine. And one of the things I've been really trying to do lately is I've been listening to historical analysis on Ukraine that comes from those who are pro-Ukraine and those who are, they're not necessarily pro-Russia, but they're definitely not pro-Ukraine. And there's like 3 or 4 different views that you can actually begin to access. People who are pro-Russia, people who are pro-Ukraine, people who tend to be more pro-NATO, but are looking at it from a more diplomatic perspective. And as I listen to each one of them, what's amazing to me is if I only listen to one of them, I would think they're absolutely right. And then I listen to another one, I go, oh, that's an interesting piece of information. And it's one of those things like honestly, with the Palestinian crisis, everyone starts the story at a different time. And it's almost when you start the story that determines your narrative. And so for some people, like with the Palestinian issue, October 7th is the starting of the story. For other people, it goes back further. And then for someone else, it goes further. It's almost like who was here the longest. The same way with Ukraine, who started the war? If you listen to one side, you're asking the question, why would you even ask that question? It's obvious that Russia started the war. That if you go back over time and you realize, oh, this goes all the way deep into the Cold War. It goes deep into the unification of Germany and the agreements between Russia, the Allies, the United States, NATO. There are so many interesting aspects to that. And I'm just using that as an example of saying, when you listen to Mindshift, we're going to bring in a lot of different perspectives over time. And I just encourage people to hang in there with us, because when we agree with you, we're actually not growing you. It's when we disagree with you. That's the opportunity for growth. Like when you disagree with me, or when you agree with me, it keeps me the same. It reinforces my already pre-held beliefs and convictions. But when you disagree with me, I have to process that. It's my only real chance for growth.
So you're saying that I'm the reason why you've grown so much in the last 5 or 6 years?
That is one way to interpret that analysis.
No, I mean, there's so much to talk about, and I think there's a difference between people who listen to the podcast who are actually engaged in our community and our audience, and the mind shifters out there, if we come up with a name, and I think the people who clip hunt on social media. And that was one thing that I found really unique, because I think there's a difference. I think there's a great community online, Instagram, TikTok, whatever it is, Threads, Facebook, YouTube, who find clips and send them and share them. I mean, me and you share clips all the time. It's kind of how we consume news in so many ways. And then we'll go and read an article, or we'll go and follow up on that subject if we're interested in it. And I think that there's a difference. And I think we're in this era now of podcasting, with the new media, unique voices and investigative journalists and people who are actually doing the independent work to become more educated and to educate others and inform others. And we're at like a unique cross point, because there are people who will only live within the clips, and there's people who will only listen to the long form, and there's people who are going to do both. And we create the long form, I think, for the ultimate listener who goes, you know what, I'm going to take a chance and a risk and listen to your ideas. And so I think there's a great responsibility, right? With great power comes great responsibility. If you hit play and you are on a drive and you listen to us and commit the hour and 5 minutes or the 45 minutes that we do an episode on, or today, because my butt is going numb, 25 minutes, I really respect that, and I appreciate it. But if you're someone who's just clip hunting and then you're angry, you probably wouldn't even hear this episode.
Right.
But you got to get out the comments. But one thing that we've found is, like, the more controversial topics we hit, the more we make the clip hunters angry and the more the podcast grows. But at what cost? At what cost is the growth? And so, we're talking about this mind shift of the cultural shift from, it feels like, in 2020, a lot of this idea of the family nucleus was challenged. And it felt like there were a lot of organizations, a lot of protesting, a lot of things happening in the world. The world was at ends with itself. It felt like all of the major cities in the US were getting burned to the ground. There were massive riots. And I don't even really want to go into the subject matter of those riots. But it felt like there was an attack on the family nucleus. I mean, even one of these organizations.
Nuclear family.
Sorry, the nuclear family. But also the family nucleus is. What is the difference between a nuclear family?
That's just the way the phrase is usually.
Is it not a nucleus? Isn't the nucleus the center of the cell?
It is. So
is it nuclear being
technically correct?
So am I just conjugating the same word, or is it two completely different words?
From nuclear family to family nucleus.
And it's my intellectual dyslexia. Shift the mind.
So is this a mind shift in your life right now?
Well, no, because I always loved the nuclear family.
Are you saying this is a mind shift you're seeing in culture?
Well, it's something we were talking about on the walk. We were basically saying it seems like things are shifting. The younger generation is actually valuing family, long-term commitment. Like locking in with a partner and having kids, and it feels like there's a shift, because it felt like, I mean, even me, like, I'm in my late 30s, and a lot of my friends aren't married, don't have kids, or working big jobs, starting big companies, but not necessarily settling down and living that lifestyle. Obviously, the spiritual side of where we come from, and like the church side, a lot of my church friends are married, and a lot of my friends that are outside of church are not. And now they're starting to get married, or they're dabbling in having kids, or even just like having kids first, then dating, then getting engaged, then getting married. Like, it's kind of a unique trade-off, or a cultural trade-off, but it feels like, with especially the shift in politics, the shift in government, the shift in who's appointed into the cabinets, and the culture that they're bringing in, it feels like there's a huge adjustment into this, drinking. It feels like it started with sobriety almost. I agree. No, I think you're right. A lot of these really famous people started becoming sober, and this wave of, I don't drink anymore. I go to the bar and I drink, what is it called?
What's Tom Holland's
It's not Death Water.
Bureau. No, Bureau?
Zero?
Yeah,
Zero
I think
alcohol?
it's called Bureau.
Is it Bureau?
Like zero.
Like zero alcohol. Yeah. Because we were watching a commercial last night.
Yeah, of him trying to buy his own product that he couldn't.
Bureau. Okay. Yeah. No, I mean,
shout out to Tom Holland. I mean, I just love that. I love that he says his greatest achievement is sobriety.
That's amazing.
And he just seems like such a likable human being.
I mean, I remember growing up, there was no alcohol in the house. I don't think you and Mom drank our entirety of our lives.
Yep.
I mean, I've seen you take a couple sips of a glass of wine. You always have this rule. You're like, if it's like world class, like I'll try a sip, and then you usually just like roll it over to me, and you're like, I'm good with that. But I think it was a huge culture shift in our family. Like, growing up with other kids, and kids were like stealing alcohol from the house, or like inviting friends over and getting drunk. Like, that was one thing I really appreciated. Like, that struggle with alcohol wasn't necessarily there for me, because there wasn't the same level of interest.
Yeah. And I think that, for me, two of the big challenges or problems that people face in life that they often drink for, one is to deal with stress, and the other one is to create a sense of happiness. I was able to deal with both of those without alcohol. I was able to deal with stress without alcohol and really found an inner peace in my relationship with Jesus. And I loved life, and life was an adventure to me. So I didn't need alcohol to feel like life was more enjoyable or more exciting. In fact, I found being sober allowed me to have more happiness, more joy, more exuberance in life. And so I think in a practical level, it wasn't even just a choosing to not have something. It was a choosing to deal with the two major issues that alcohol contends with, is either stress or happiness. And I found a solution to both of those without alcohol.
But there's a huge wave, right?
Yeah.
There's all of these amazing non-alcoholic drinks that are kind of getting brought to the major cities and all over the world. And then you go to restaurants now, and there's even like a whole section of like non-alcoholic beverages. And I love that because I think it forces people to be creative and be constantly innovating inside of that industry of going, you know what, alcohol, just because you add alcohol doesn't make it better. It actually has to be something of value and really good. But it does feel like this younger generation is adapting and onto healthier values faster. It took my generation, I think, a long time, like the late 30s, mid 30s, to go, you know what, I don't think waking up with a hangover feels good anymore.
Yeah.
Where I think this younger culture goes, no, like that, why would you do that? It's so bad for you.
Yeah. And I saw this report from the Barna report. And Barna is similar to like Gallup and other organizations that do massive surveys and censuses to see where cultural values are and political values and different things like that. And they're a huge part of like naming generations, whether it's Gen X or Gen Z or baby boomers or baby busters, that whole language, right? And they were saying that there is a shift in renaming this younger generation that's coming up. I think it's in the 15 to 25 kind of category, and calling them the open generation. And they had another designation, whether it was Generation Y or something like that. And so I was reading this report, and it said this younger generation is moving toward classical values of pro-family, pro-marriage, conservative cultural values, and a return toward masculinity and femininity, a belief in two genders, a move against, if you want to use the more cultural language, a move against wokeness. And it's a surprising shift in this younger generation. But there was another aspect, in which is why they're calling it the open generation, an incredible openness to faith and spirituality, to God, and even an exploration of who Jesus is. And that's why they're saying this seems to be an open generation, that they're doing the exact opposite of their older brothers and sisters. They're basically saying, I think there's something valuable and rich in these beliefs. And if you think about it, there's a huge movement in the last 5-10 years toward Stoicism, and rediscovering the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius, of the influence of Aristotle and Socrates and Plato, and you look at some of that historical philosophical ideologies of what it means to be an ideal human. It, in some sense, shouldn't surprise us that if we're going back to ancient wisdoms, that we don't all of a sudden then begin to look at the wisdom of Jesus. Because one of the interesting things, I love Stoicism in many ways, but the teachings of Jesus fills this massive gap that Stoicism doesn't address. And
what is the gap that Stoicism doesn't address?
One of them would be love and empathy, the intrinsic, essential need of human beings to be known and understood and valued. And it's almost, because for me, Jesus seems to absorb all the great thinking of Stoicism and then adds this deep belief in the divine image existing in every human being, and human beings created for love, for relationship, and for this beautiful life. And which is interesting to me because I didn't even think about this, to be honest with you. I'm in college, and I didn't know that I was, but I was a Stoic. I said I was a Socratic, and that was what I would openly say when people ask me on belief system. But it was Aurelius and Aristotle and Socrates that radically affected me and shaped my thinking. And then I found Jesus. And so I didn't find them in conflict. I actually found Jesus as the elevation of all that thinking. But anyway, going back to this mind shift, it maybe shouldn't surprise us that it's almost like the generation right before this generation found Stoicism, and now this generation is becoming really open to Jesus, to faith, to a deeply spiritual life, and then to that universe of values that looked like they were no longer going to return. I mean, who would have predicted that this younger generation would become more culturally conservative than the generation right before them?
Why do you think sobriety has become such a trend?
Wow, that's a really good question, and maybe I want to hear your thoughts too. But what comes to my mind is, wow, I mean, I have conflicting thoughts. I think one of them is that this generation has seen the devastating effect of addiction, and they're acknowledging it. I mean, it's a generation moving toward health foods. It's a generation moving away from artificial chemicals in our products, and a generation that's really aware of what it means to be organic, and so you can't ignore the devastating effect of alcohol on the brain. And so I think that's one of it, is that this is a generation that's moving toward health. And if you're not going to be hypocritical, you have to then acknowledge that this also is unhealthy. And I think that's one reason, is because the culture is moving toward a healthy view of life. But I also think there's this other aspect of it where, I remember when you were younger, you may not remember this, you told me one of the reasons you didn't make a lot of destructive choices is you had too many friends making destructive choices and you saw the outcome. I actually think this is a generation who looked at the people who came before them and said, I don't want that. I don't want to become that. And I don't want the consequence of that, even though the benefit is very attractive. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I think one, you drink too much, you don't feel so good. I think it's just simple math, right? I think there's a difference. One, I didn't grow up around a lot of alcohol, if any, for the first 18 years of my life. And then I didn't really go to high school parties. I wasn't really invited to them. I was a super nerd. And then when it started coming around, it wasn't attractive. It wasn't like elegant. It wasn't beautiful. It was just drink to feel a certain way. And I was like, well, I feel a lot already. And, and I think maybe this generation, I agree with you. I'm just going to hop on that wagon of thought. I think the generation witnessed something in the generation before it and realized that it wanted to disassociate from that behavior. I also think it was addicted to other things like video games and vapes, and TikTok and social media. And so I think there's a different addiction that's replaced alcohol.
Yeah.
And so I think I'd be curious to see the next 2 to 3 generations, to see if they actually reject social media to a certain degree.
Yeah, because now
if they actually move away from everything being filmed and recorded and YouTubed and live streamed.
Oh wow.
And this kind of NPC behavior.
More privacy.
Yeah, I wonder, and I think there will be a movement of that. I do think there will always be all of it, right? That we live in a world where there's still people who live in the jungle. Yeah. There are people who live in high rises. Yeah. Like there are people who live very modern lives and very rural and basic, simple lives. And I don't know if it's like anyone's to say that like one way of life is better than the other. It's just you're living your unique narrative and your journey, your story. But I don't know. I think people are starting to become sober because they're starting to make healthier decisions. And I think the same way that like Carlos was telling us his kids were informing him that, what is it, the color red 40 is like a poisonous like food coloring.
Yeah.
Like, don't buy that cereal, Dad.
So he's this little elementary school kid's telling him has red 40 in it. We're not going to eat it.
We're not going to eat it. It had like raiding a candy box or something.
Yeah.
And he's like, what's red 40, guys?
But I also think there's also a shift from alcohol to cannabis.
Yeah.
And that a lot of people, are addicted to weed, and people with addictive behaviors will find their product.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And so I do think, I have friends who, really good friends who they just swear on psychedelics, and they have a strong, at least psychological addiction to mushrooms, and others with ayahuasca,
DMT, these like peyote experiences.
Yeah. And I think those substances are replacing some of the others. So it's not like we're moving into a substance-free culture or an addiction-free culture. We're just replacing some addictions with others. But I think overall, a good thing is happening. I actually do think there's genuine sobriety. I think there actually is a high value to treat your body. Oh, wow, sounds old school, like a temple. That what you put inside your body has an effect on what comes out of your body. You cannot expect to have a healthy mind and a healthy body if you're putting unhealthy things into your body.
I mean, into both, right?
Yeah.
If you put unhealthy things into your mind or your body, your soul is the outcome of your soul, right? The product comes out. It comes out in your behavior. It comes out in your, whether you're clarity of thought or fogginess, I think is a indirect correlation to what you input inside of your mind and body and soul. There's so much to talk about. We talked about, we're talking about sobriety, we're talking about addiction. But one of the things that, it feels like we're hardwired to be addicted to something because we come from a spiritual background, right? And there are so many Christians who are addicted to Christian things, right? Or
even non-Christian things.
But I'm always a little bit freaked out, because I'm like, wait, you're judgmental of the drinking and the smoking and the sex, but you're so addicted to your own Christianese language,
or you're addicted to food,
or you're addicted to smoking cigars or golfing. Or there's just, it seems like all humans replace something with another thing. Yeah. Right. What is that? Why are we so addicted to doing things?
Well, humans cannot exist in a vacuum. You cannot get rid of a negative thing if you don't add a positive thing. If you move from negative to zero, you'll go back to negative. It just will be a different negative. You really do have to replace negative habits with positive habits, negative, patterns with positive patterns, negative thinking with positive thinking. And, you can't stop eating. You have to move from eating bad food to eating good food. You have to move from, spending your time badly to spending your time well. And so I think that we have to accept the fact that we humans move toward the negative in a vacuum. Negative behaviors require no work. All positive behaviors require a lot of work. I wish it wasn't that way. If you do nothing physically, you'll get fat. If you want to be healthy, you have to actually do the work. If you do nothing mentally, your brain gets dull and you become stupid.
You will brain rot.
You brain rot. If you want to optimize your mental capacity, you have to read, you have to study, you have to think. Everything in life that is good requires hard work. Everything in life that is destructive requires no work.
Isn't that interesting? You can fall into addiction, but you have to climb your way into discipline.
There you go. That's it.
There we go. Put it on a mug. But that's why can't we just fall up?
Yeah.
Why can't we just fall into greatness?
Maybe that's the problem with the phrase falling in love.
That's where my mind was going during your whole last conversation. Go into it.
Yeah, no.
Why do we fall into love?
I don't know if falling in love ever works. You have to work into love. And when you work at love, it becomes a beautiful, sustainable thing. When you fall in love, you're either falling into romance or falling into pleasure, or falling into an addiction.
You could, yeah, I think falling in love is representative of the addictive nature of the feelings you feel when you fall into like lust or like into
Yeah.
someone, right? Because you
Yeah.
don't really like love is like there's a depth and a unique nature to
Mhm.
love.
Yeah, you cannot fall into real love. You have to work into real love,
Mm.
and you have to value another human being more than you, and do the hard work of realigning your life in such a way that you make room for another human being. That's actually a sacrifice. Somebody told me I want a relationship with someone, I just, but I want to be completely me without having to change at all.
Was it me?
No, it wasn't you. And
Sounds like a me thing.
no, it was actually a woman, and
Do I know her?
I don't think you do.
Oh, okay.
But it was a very sincere question. But I thought you're never going to get married, because if you think that marriage is about finding someone who brings zero disruption into your life, you don't understand the complexity and the hard work of love. And and I think that's actually one of the challenges of when you're single for a long time, is that every human being will become a disruptor in some way, and or you have someone who's so subservient and so submissive that there is actually no dynamic to the relationship at all. And
One thing that I find really interesting is this idea of like us living our authentic selves. I hear
Mhm.
that a lot. Like,
Yeah.
I want you to get to know my authentic self.
Yeah.
And then I kind of, and there's a lot of this conversation here and in LA, I think in major cities. I mean, it's all over the world. We're human nature. But we live in this era where it's like, if you don't accept me for exactly who I am and what I am and how I am, then you haven't accepted me for my authentic self. And sometimes I wonder if our authentic self is really just not our best self. It's just it's like the bottom floor. And I'm like, I don't know that we should make people sign a lifetime agreement like at the bottom floor,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I think our authentic self is like the basement. Like we store stuff there. Some stuff gets moved upstairs. Some stuff gets rotated in and out. Maybe the heater's down there, the water cooler. I don't know. But can you break or myth bust some of this desire to be known in our authentic self?
Well, one, when people say, I just want everyone to be authentic, I love the word authentic, but it has to be translated properly. If authentic means to be restored to your original intent, then I'm for you becoming your authentic self. But when you say, I'm just being my authentic self, I'm going, you may actually be a expression of someone that is not your original intent. Like if you authentically want to steal my car, I want you to be inauthentic. If what you really want, right, is to take my wallet, I don't want you to be authentic. I want you to be your inauthentic self. And ironically, a lot of people struggle with this because when you're on your best behavior, you're actually being an inauthentic version of you. Because if who you are at your core is the worst version of you,
amidst bad behavior.
I just want a hypocritical version of you.
Okay, so how do we distinguish between who we are, our best behaviors, or our ideals,
Yes.
our human ideals, or the ideal version of ourselves? And how do we not revert back to being subhuman or sub-self?
Yeah, we need to aspire to be our full authentic self, which means that who I am, who you are, is still on a journey to discover our authentic self. And so sometimes we think, oh, this is my authentic me, but no, if it's a lesser version of you, I don't call that your authentic you. I call that a distorted, broken, fragmented substitute for your true essence. And so maybe I'm an idealist. I believe every human being is designed and created to be an expression of love and hope and compassion and integrity, nobility, honor. I think that's who we are in our essential intention.
Where do you think this desire, sorry, I'm asking a lot of questions. Oh, my butt is so asleep. My whole right leg's asleep now. Are you okay?
Yeah.
We're going to be broken after this podcast. I guess you can leave this little rant in. Where do you think this obsession comes from? Us living our authentic self?
I think it's because we want to be the real version of us. We want to feel that we've discovered our uniqueness, and we want to be known in our uniqueness.
But what do you think happened in culture where people all of a sudden woke up one day and were like, we've been faking it this whole time?
Oh, I know where it came from.
Where?
The experiment of individualization, and where once humans lived in community with each other, and our identity was formed in that community. Our identity was formed in a family. Our identity was formed in our extended family. And we knew who we were in that tribe. We knew who we were in that village. We knew who we were because we were among a people. And as we moved toward being individualistic, one of the beautiful things about the United States is that it's an experiment in the individual, but it's also a part of its shadow, its brokenness. Because when you become too individualistic, you lose your sense of self. We do not have an identity outside of community, but we've somehow convinced ourselves that we can only know ourselves when we've detached ourselves from the perspectives and influence and opinions of other people. You don't have an identity outside of the reflection of others.
That's really interesting. We don't have identity outside the reflection of others. Wow. I find it fun to spend time with my friends who build companies. It's one of my favorite things I like to do. I love to spend time with people who are doing really cool things. Whether you're behind the scenes as like an operator or COO, COO, or just, a GM of something, or a creator founder who's like still trying to figure it out, whether it's a graphic designer or someone, a barista who makes coffee. I love spending time with people who do things. And I'm always really interested in that. And when I have friends who have companies, I don't talk about ideas for their companies as like, you guys should do this. I say, we should do this.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm team Erwin, or I'm team Austin, or I'm team Mosaic, or I'm team Arena, or I'm team Forma, or I'm team, Mimi Chang's. Like, I talk about my friends' projects as if I take ownership in the longevity of the business. And I think that that's got to change, because I think that's integral, one, in our country and who we are, because you talk about it, it's the United States of America, right? There's this thing that this ideal that we've, in a construct of ideas and people that are taking individual specific tribes and then merging them together and going, this is a space where you can be both an individual and both a tribe and both a part of a tribe. You can have uniqueness, and then you can also have value and acceptance. And I find cities like New York City or Los Angeles, or, whether it's Miami or Chicago or these different places we get to go to, and I find that the most unique humans are the ones that have great ownership of the country and the nation or the space that they're from, but that also are really open to the introduction of new flavors or new cultures or the existence of new people integrating into their culture. I find the thing that holds us back sometimes is this maybe extension or extreme tribalism that can happen, right? You look at like gangs in Los Angeles, right? Some of the most unique cultures in America and in LA are the gang cultures. It's really fascinating. There's a huge sense of tribalism, a huge sense of self-protection, and how we come up together and protect our own, and we go to war against the next tribe that's 2 blocks down or XYZ. And by no means, and I'm an expert of this. And so, but growing up in kind of the way we did, I was around the projects a lot, and around a lot of your kind of the church plants that you were building, and you see it, and you see this interesting culture of people who love each other deeply, but don't necessarily hold like the healthiest cultural values that should be passed on to other tribes, but something that's so unique and artistic in a way, it's so authentic to them, but maybe it's not the best authentic self.
Right. It's also a very narrow and limited identity, which is a perfect example. When you're in a gang, you don't have an identity problem, because they've told you who you are, and you've embraced that. That's who you are. And part of the problem is that the world isn't just your gang. So now everyone else is them, and just and we are us, and we only protect us. It's one of the interesting things in identity politics, where once your identity is something that you cannot change, like if your identity is that you're Latino, or that you're Black, or that you're white, or that you're
Whoa, why'd you look at me? Look at Austin.
Austin, and or if your identity is that you're male or female, if your identity is something in some sense that's fixed, it actually becomes more fragile, because you are deeper than that. You're more than that. And I mean, I made a choice very early on, because as a Latino, especially because I'm so much older than you, and I was always told I was only supposed to work with Latinos. Like I was told where my place was.
By
When I became a person of faith, by the people who led me to faith were the Southern Baptists, and it was very racist, very, very dogmatic. And I was told where I belonged. And I made a decision very early in my life that I would never be limited by my ethnicity. And I remember one time being told in Miami at a conference on diversity by a white leader that only white people can lead multi-ethnic communities. But I had the most diverse congregation in the United States, perhaps in the world. And I thought, this is fascinating, that this is actually the belief system. But it's because I didn't let my identity be being Latin. I would have never been able to reach people from Japan or China or Korea. I would have never been able to reach people from Scandinavia and Europe if my identity was in my ethnicity, or if my identity was in my color. A Mosaic would have never been a congregation filled with both people who were Black and white if my identity had been in my color. You have to actually go to a deeper identity around your essence, around your values, around your character. And that's, to me, when identity actually becomes most powerful.
There's so much in this, and I think there's such a unique perspective here. But I know we wanted to do a shorter episode today. So I want to thank everybody who's listening in. We really appreciate you joining us for this episode of the Mindshift podcast, where we talk about identity, we talk about tribalism, we talk about being your authentic self, we talk about sobriety, and what else did we talk about?
And significant cultural mind shifts that are taking place.
Significant cultural mind shifts that are taking place around the world. Guys, if you're listening to this episode, we want you to rate and review this. We also want you to share it with your friends. You can follow us on Instagram at MindshiftPod. This is Erwin McManus, and I'm Erwin McManus, and together we do this thing called Mindshift. See you guys next week.